What's up, Rocky students? Hey, last night we had the opportunity to go through the final week of our series called Transformation. It was a great night. We got the opportunity to talk about the life of Peter, but funny thing, I forgot to do the message with a microphone on. So this video you're about to watch right now is a re-recording, but hey, we hope you enjoy it. All right, so let me ask you a question. Have you ever had someone say something along the lines of, hey, I think you would be great at this thing? It could be anything, right? It could be singing, it could be soccer, it could be something silly, it could be something like hacky sack. But chances are, at some point in your life, someone approached you and saw something in you and said, hey, I think you would actually be pretty good at this. So for y'all, I'm like genuinely curious. So even for you guys at home, like what was that thing for you? Was there ever a time when someone walked straight up to you, or a coach or a teacher or a leader, maybe a pastor, walked up and said, hey, I actually think that you would be great at this thing? And so whatever that is, hey, chances are, man, that something stuck with you. It might have been important. And for me, I had that same thing happen. Growing up around sports my entire life, you start to get to know a sport. You get to start to know kind of what your role is in the sport and on the team. And so for me, I actually really gravitated towards strategy, what to do, like how the game works, how to learn the game a little bit more. So for me, like I had people telling me, hey, Mike, have you ever considered being a lacrosse coach? And for me, that was like the biggest compliment ever. I thought that was really cool, and it stuck with me. And so a few times, like people had said something, and I said, no, like I'm just a player right now. I don't really want to do that. But after time, and it occurred maybe once, twice, three times, I thought, okay, well, hey, maybe this is something that I'll actually go and seek out and try to do. And so, finally, I get into my mid-20s, and I'm like, you know what? I really think that this is something that I would like to try to do. So I jumped in, all right? I jumped in and I said, look, I'm going to figure out what this looks like. I'm going to find some opportunities. I'm going to go see what I can do to coach. And so that's exactly what I did. And this started a multi-year commitment to various lacrosse teams, to being their head coach. I mean, I started at 5th grade and 6th grade, and then I worked my way all the way up to being the JV head coach. And y'all, I love being a JV head coach, all right? It has all the perks of being a head coach, but none of the pressure. So I loved being a JV head coach, and man, listen, I loved it, okay? One of the coolest things that happened as a JV head coach, man, seeing these high school lacrosse players find success in their sport filled me with so much joy. I loved it. But I also learned this was difficult. It wasn't easy. Just being told that I'd be good at something didn't mean that I had everything figured out yet, right? It didn't mean that, man, I could just show up out of the box and just be a perfect lacrosse coach. No, I needed to learn and I needed to work to be a little bit better. And so for me, I learned not only is this something that I have to work hard into, but it's an identity I have to latch into. It's a role I have to step into. But I also learned that the power of a conversation of, hey, man, I see this in you. Like, I see that you can do this, and that it's important. A simple invitation completely changed the trajectory of my life. Jesus had a conversation like this. He had a conversation like this with a disciple named Simon, and his conversation radically changed the direction of his life. And it may not have happened otherwise. And so tonight, hey, we're going to talk about Simon Peter. Okay, we're going to talk about Simon Peter. And for those of you guys at home, man, you might recognize this name. You might remember some of the Bible stories that you've heard about Simon Peter. And so, hey, for you guys at home, just seriously, think through, are there stories about Simon Peter that you remember? What are some of those things for you? What are those things that come straight to mind? And that's a good thing to be able to just kind of wrap your mind around what that is. And so for us, hey, tonight, listen, Peter's a major character. Okay, Peter is a major character throughout the Gospels, throughout the book of Acts, and throughout the early church as a whole. So throughout the New Testament, Peter is mentioned. Peter is woven throughout the New Testament. And so without Jesus, without this simple conversation, Peter may never have had his name changed from Simon to Peter, and we may never have the church the way that we have it today. And so tonight, Peter's transformation, the transformation that he experienced in his life happened because of Jesus. And listen, a life transformed becomes our testimony about Jesus. Now, here's what I mean about that, okay? Here's what I mean with that, okay? Your life, the transformation that you experience in your life becomes your testimony for Jesus, okay? The person you are, or the person you were before Jesus, and the person who you are now because of Jesus becomes your testimony. To the point when people come up and say to you, hey man, like, I know you follow Jesus, but like, what's your story? You get to say, man, here's my testimony. Here's who I was, here's who I am now, and here I am striving to be. That's your testimony. So a life transformed becomes our testimony about Jesus. And the reality is that Simon is someone that Jesus identified as someone who could do so much more. Who could do so much more than what he was already doing. All right? When Jesus walked up to Simon Peter while he was fishing, all right, he called not only his brother, he called the rest of the disciples, but he looks him straight in the eye and he says, hey, come follow me. And something about that just makes me think that like Jesus called him out for a reason, like knowing exactly who he could be and who he might be if he allows Jesus to do his thing. And so, listen, Jesus quickly, after he calls him, quickly after that, he has a conversation with Peter, right? He walks right up to Peter and he says, hey man, like, I like your name Simon, but I'm actually going to give you a new name, all right? Your new name is Rock, all right? Peter. And this might not have seemed significant, right? It might not have been significant, but when you read this scripture, what it does is it adds weight to the name, okay? So here we go. Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 through 19. Here's what it says. It says, now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Otherwise, another way to say that is, hey, who does everyone else say I am? Right? If you walk into the marketplace, you ask any random person, who do they say I am? And they respond by saying this. Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And Jesus is so good at this, guys. Jesus is so good at this. He asks such great questions. He asks this introduction question, and then he digs in deeper, right? And he says, but who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Right? And Jesus answers him. Or Simon Peter replies, he says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. And the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. And whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Now, guys, first of all, man, what must it have felt like for Jesus to look Peter straight into the eyes and say, look, I am going to build my church on you. I'm going to build my church on you. You are going to be the foundation. When I'm gone, man, the torch is being passed to you. Man, that must have felt unreal. I think in this moment, it's probably fair to imagine that Peter probably felt some sort of mixture of excitement, right? Like, holy cow, man, this is so cool. Like, maybe I'll do this. Maybe we'll do things this way. And then suddenly you start thinking about, man, just the scale of how big that task is, and maybe some terror, some fear starts to set in. And then I think something that happens to all of us when we have these conversations, when people look you in the eye and say, hey, I think that you would be great at this, we sometimes ask the question in our own head, man, am I actually good enough? Am I actually capable enough? Is this something I would actually be able to do? And I think the truth is that all of us, we feel that. And this is a moment where we feel excited and then we feel terrified all in the same moment. And then man, am I even good enough to do that? Man, maybe it depends on the severity. Maybe it depends on what people say. Like maybe it's something really small. But man, when someone looks you in the eye and says, hey man, I think you would be a great pastor. Or hey man, I think you would be a great teacher. Or hey, I really think that you would be an incredible president of the United States, right? Like something that might be a little more extreme. Like you think about those things and they stick with you. And listen, I think that Peter's testimony is a perfect representation of you and I. I really do. And if you don't know Peter's story, for those of you guys at home, like here are a couple of highlights, all right? Here's some good and some bad, all right? Cool thing, Peter is one of the 2 disciples that is able to come up to the mountain with Jesus to the Transfiguration. He gets to see something incredible that the other disciples do not get to see. Peter sees Jesus perform countless miracles, and after Jesus leaves, he actually performs some himself. Peter is called to be the rock of the new church. And in that scripture that we read in Matthew chapter 16, Jesus saying that he's going to build this church upon this rock, man, that is not a mistake. He's talking about Peter. Another thing, man, Peter becomes the pseudo-earthly leader of the disciples next to Jesus. He becomes the guy who bears the torch once Jesus leaves. Some of the other things that we might forget about. Peter is called to walk on water with Jesus, right? He steps out on the boat, but in his fear, he falls into the water. Peter also, he cuts a dude's ear off when Jesus is being arrested. We forget about that, okay? Like, I think it's funny. Listen, guys at home, listen, go check this out, okay? In every single gospel, there is a section that says Jesus is arrested. Go through it. Matthew, it says a disciple cut off his ear. Mark, it says a disciple cut off his ear. Luke, a disciple cuts off his ear. And then I think it's in John, he says, yeah, Peter did it, right? Another thing, listen, hey, all of those things happen. Peter's experienced transformation. He's experienced Jesus' love. He's experienced his joy. He's experienced his challenges. He's experienced his success. And yet Peter still denies Jesus 3 times. And so tonight, today, tomorrow, 10 years from now, man, we got to remember something, and this is what we got to remember. Listen, we got to remember transformation is messy. It just is. Transformation is messy, all right? But let me tell you something. Transformation is worth it. It is worth it. Transformation and just change in general is a long process. It's a long process. It takes a long time to get where you want to go. And listen, Peter's story is not perfect, and neither is yours, and neither is mine. And we look at Jesus and we say, man, we love you so much. Jesus, I love you, I love you, I love you. But then the next moment we find ourselves wrapped up in sin. We say, okay, Jesus, I'm taking control of my faith. Like, I'm going to make this the real thing. I'm going to read my Bible every day. I'm going to pray. I'm going to journal. I'm going to do all these things. And then life happens, and then 2 months later, you're like, bro, I don't even know where my Bible is. I don't know the last time I went to church. But we have to remember that there is a God who receives you back every single time. Much like the prodigal son, when the father runs out to the driveway, hikes up his robe, and he runs to the son. When you come home, when you come back to Jesus, there is a God who receives you back and wraps you in his loving embrace. He picks you up. He sets your feet back on solid ground, and he sets you back on the path towards him. And he reminds us that his Spirit is with us in all that we do. Listen, transformation is a lifelong process. It is a lifelong process. It is not overnight. You will not have it figured out by the time you're 10. You will not have it figured out by the time you're 15. Y'all, you will not have it figured out by the time you're 18. You will not have it figured out when college is over. You will not. Your hope is that you figure out a little more. Every year, you figure out a little more. Every day, you figure out a little more. And like a river that flows perpetually downhill without an end goal in mind, our journey towards transformation to be more like Jesus does not end until we are reunited with him in heaven. Transformation, it is a lifelong process towards one thing: holiness. Being set apart, looking more like Jesus every day. The goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to become more like Jesus each and every day. Monday, closer. Tuesday, get closer. Wednesday, get closer. To draw near to Him. To draw closer and closer to Him. To spend time with Him. To speak with Him. To commune with Him. To be present with Him. To invite others into His love. To trust Him in your hardships, but also to trust Him in your successes. That the times that you go to God are not only in your hardships when life is hard, but you also go with Him and you celebrate when life is good. Romans 12, 1 through 2. Let's not forget this, okay? I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercy of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. And that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. Peter's transformation became his testimony. Man, I was a fisherman. That's all I knew. That's all I was ever going to be. Then I met Jesus. And now I'm walking with the Messiah. My life is radically different. That's his testimony. The transformation that occurs in your life because of Jesus is your testimony. So many people are allowing themselves to be conformed to the world. Why? Why? It's pretty simple, actually. Conforming to the world is easy. It's easy to walk like everyone else. It's easy to dress like everyone else. It's easy to post on social media like everyone else. It's easy to listen to the same music that everyone else is listening to. It's easy. Man, it might be cool. And listen, hey, it's what everyone else is doing. I get it, man. Go with the flow. But listen, why would you want Jesus' transformation? My question is, why wouldn't you? How do you look at the transformation that Jesus offers your life and say, no, I'm good? Man, you look at Jesus and you see a source of peace. Let me tell you something. Life is not always peaceful, but knowing that Jesus brings peace, man, that's something I want. A sense of purpose. Understanding that there is something for you to accomplish in this world, on this earth. You are to go and to make disciples, to be a light in the darkness in your schools, your sports teams, your jobs, whatever it is. That is the calling on your life. It doesn't have to be your career. Your calling is a different thing. Your calling is to simply look a little bit more like Jesus every single day. Transformation in Jesus, man, it offers unconditional love. Unconditional. It does not ask, what have you done for me lately? It says, welcome. I'm glad you're here. I love you. And that transformation with Jesus, man, it brings a promise that He is always with you. Man, my question is, why wouldn't you want the change that He brings? Peter goes on to be a major leader in the early church. And listen, y'all, he's not perfect, but neither are you. Neither am I. And I think if we let Jesus do a work in us, He's going to do something pretty incredible. So why don't you lean into Him? See what He's got.